The day I was diagnosed with stomach cancer, my fiancé moved in with his mistress. The mistress was pregnant and often complained to my mother that the children in the house did not get along with her. She insisted that if my mother wanted grandchildren, the kids had to be kicked out. Ben Lin looked at my adopted daughter Wendy with concern and then coaxed her to jump into the river. Afterwards, during a call to me, he cursed me repeatedly, wishing for my death, and now, I have truly left. However, Ben has become unhinged. I just got back from the hospital, carrying that heavy report in my hand. The conclusion was just 4 words, late-stage cancer. Just then, my phone rang, and I received a message. I opened it to find it was from Ben, but his tone was somewhat unusual. He wrote, "Lily Zhang, guess where I am?" I felt a shock in my heart when I realized it was Fiona Yang, the woman Ben was seeing outside. I quickly took a taxi home. When I arrived, I saw Fiona leisurely lounging on the sofa, eating the newly released grapes. I remembered that just a few days ago, Wendy had wanted Ben to buy them, but Ben had said that these grapes had too many chemicals and were unhealthy. Now, in front of Fiona, there were 2 large plates of grapes. Where's Ben? I looked around the house but couldn't find him. Fiona spat out the grape seed in her mouth and smiled at me faintly, saying, "Guess." Right after she spoke, Mrs. Lin walked in. She asked, "Fiona, do you think it's tasty? If it's not sweet enough, I'll send Ben out to buy more." After Mrs. Lin put the ingredients away, she came in. Upon seeing me, her smile instantly vanished, replaced by annoyance. She said, "Why are you at home today? Don't you have classes?" The little girl in the house was the same. As soon as it got light, she disappeared, hiding away and avoiding work, only coming out to eat. Mrs. Lin began to pick on Wendy and me. Fiona laughed and said, "Auntie, don't be upset. Once the baby in my belly is born, I promise I'll be very diligent." Her words made Mrs. Lin burst into laughter, but then she shot me a glare before heading to the kitchen to keep busy. I didn't want to deal with them and was planning to go back to my room when suddenly Fiona asked me, "Lily, do you know where Ben and your child are right now?" A tightness gripped my heart, and I felt a chill run through me. "What did you say?" I walked up to Fiona and directly took the grapes from her hand. She smiled slightly and said, "You'll find out if you go take a look." I asked, "Where are they?" "Just hurry up and say it." "Where are they?" I asked her anxiously, but the more nervous I became, the less she seemed willing to speak. I couldn't help but tap her hand, continuing to ask, "Where are they?" She gave me an evasive glance, covered her face, and said, "It's so hot today, how am I supposed to know where they are?" In my frustration, I slapped her. Fiona screamed in pain, and her cries caught the attention of Mrs. Lin in the kitchen. When Mrs. Lin came out and saw the scene, she bluntly criticized me. By the time I reached the village entrance, an elderly woman told me that Ben had taken Wendy to the reservoir. I felt a tightening in my chest, sensing that things were not looking good. Ben, being the selfish person he is, would do anything for his own gain. As soon as I turned the corner, I saw him pushing Wendy's head into the water. I hurriedly shouted, "What are you doing? Let go of Wendy." I rushed over and grabbed Ben by the hair, pulling him back. He cried out in pain, "Let go. Lily, let go of his hands." Wendy finally managed to surface from the water and cried out to Lily, "Mommy, I don't want to learn how to swim. I don't want to learn how to swim." I pulled Wendy onto the shore and comforted her, saying, "It's okay, Wendy. We won't learn anymore, let's go home." As I got up to leave, Ben stopped me. He looked at me and said, "Fiona is having a baby boy, and the fortune teller said that Wendy will affect Fiona's baby. I cannot let Fiona and her child be harmed." I gave Ben a slap, but he seemed oblivious and became even more arrogant. Lily and Wendy aren't my biological siblings, but the child in Fiona's belly is indeed mine, and I have to think about them. Ben lost control and tried to push Wendy into the water. I stopped him and urged Wendy to run towards the village. Ben, what on earth are you thinking? I stared at Ben, who was now filled with crazy thoughts, completely different from the considerate person he used to be. Lily, ever since you found out you couldn't conceive, I've been really agitated. I can't let anything happen to Fiona. Ben loudly exposed the pain I've carried for years. He finally said it out loud, he finally admitted it. Every word he uttered felt like a sharp blade piercing my heart, unbearable and painful. Lily, that's not what I meant. Ben realized he had misspoken and immediately grabbed my hand, trying to explain. Lily, please listen to me. I violently shook off his hand and ran towards the village without looking back. After running a distance, I suddenly felt a tightness in my chest and experienced a wave of discomfort, followed by blood surging from my mouth. This scene happened to be witnessed by Henry Zhao. A few days later, I was compelled to stay in the hospital at Henry's insistence, as he was my attending physician. I had no choice but to take a few days off to recuperate in the hospital. Ben has never come to see me. Clearly, Fiona is also having her pregnancy checkups at this hospital. Ben and I were classmates in high school, and we only confirmed our romantic relationship after graduating from college. Over these 6 years, we have gone through a lot together. Back in high school, Ben and Fiona were an enviable couple, often seen as the perfect pair at school. I could only stand quietly in the corner, watching Ben, following his light like a sunflower. Fiona was not only beautiful but also highly social. She quickly married a rich heir from the county town after graduation. This man owned several properties and was a somewhat well-known businessman, allowing Fiona to live a life free of financial worries and never again have to struggle for a living. When they broke up, Fiona told Ben, "He can buy me a house and a car, and give me a better life. What can you offer me? Don't talk to me about feelings, can emotions put food on the table?" After hearing the news, Ben fell into despair and completely broke down. He shut himself in his rental apartment and didn't go out for 3 whole months, nor did he go to work. It wasn't until he ran out of money to pay rent that he was forced to move out. I accompanied Ben during this difficult time in his life. I rented a place next door, and after work, I would go to see him, cook for him, do his laundry, and clean up. At first, Ben ignored me and stayed locked up in his room, but I didn't give up. I don't want to see that once bright and handsome boy fall into despair like this. I remember how dazzling Ben was in high school, his fair skin, bright eyes, and his smile like the warm sun in winter, making people feel warm and comfortable. To me, Ben was a ray of light in my dreary life. That year, when I had just started college, my only family member passed away in a car accident, leaving me with nothing and crying every day. One night, Ben found me alone in the playground, in tears. He was worried that I might harm myself, so he stayed by my side. We talked from the twinkling stars until dawn, as if we had experienced a long stretch of time. As the sun rose, Ben smiled at me and said, "Look, the sun is coming up. The night will always pass, and life will be bright again." At that moment, I was completely captivated by Ben. It was he who showed me hope and gave me the courage to start anew. I vowed that one day I would do everything in my power to warm this boy's heart, so he would no longer feel alone. In the wilderness of my life, he is the ray of sunshine that illuminates my heart. After being with Ben for 6 months, he started to consider marriage, but a premarital health checkup form made him hesitant. He changed his mind from marriage to engagement, telling me that he wanted to work harder for 2 more years to give me a grand wedding. Over the years, I have been by Ben's side, accompanying him from his spirited moments to his lowest lows. During the downturns in both his love life and career, I have always been there for him, which is why I firmly believe that he will marry me. Even if I can't have children, I believe he won't betray me. Although we have no car and no house, and we possess nothing but this ring, I still feel like the happiest person in the world. With Ben, I have a home, a complete home. To be honest, when Ben suddenly suggested that we get engaged, I didn't think much about the reason behind it. Perhaps he was just feeling confused for the moment and wanted to take this opportunity to live well with me, but due to financial reasons, he could only propose engagement for now. These things don't matter, as long as I can be with him. I believe that over time, he will gradually come to like me. However, beautiful dreams are always shattered by reality. Just 2 months after our engagement, we attended a class reunion for Ben. During the event, someone inadvertently mentioned that Fiona had gotten divorced, and instantly all eyes were on Ben. In that moment, I keenly noticed the complex expression on Ben's face, a mixture of shock and regret. He appeared restless, and in the end, he drank himself into a stupor. Perhaps from the moment he received the news, I had already failed completely. It wasn't until today that I had to admit that Ben could never forget Fiona. Even though she had heartlessly left him, in Ben's eyes, she remained his most precious friend, irreplaceable. As for me, I was merely a backup, a spiritual refuge after his loss, and a springboard for a new beginning. I mistakenly thought that my love could touch his heart, not realizing that his heart had long belonged to Fiona. Enduring the torment of a stomachache, I forced myself to go to the village primary school for class. After the lesson, I was about to head to the clinic to get some medicine when I came across a heartbreaking sight at the village entrance. Ben and Fiona were walking side by side along the field ridge, laughing and chatting just as they did when they were in love. Moreover, Fiona's belly was noticeably round, clearly indicating that she was expecting Ben's child. Everything happened so suddenly that I felt a bit lost. Ben and I had always clicked well and shared so many sweet memories together. I remember during our university vacation, we went hiking together. The trail was steep, and I struggled to keep up, but Ben held my hand the entire time, staying by my side. When we reached the top of the mountain, the view was breathtaking. He suddenly hugged me from behind and whispered in my ear, "Lily, it's so beautiful here. I really wish I could be with you forever." At that moment, I felt my cheeks flush and my heart race. I was so happy I could almost faint. I stumbled back home, and as soon as I stepped through the door, I couldn't help but collapse onto the bed, tears streaming down my face. The thought that Ben might abandon me for another woman crushed my heart. I took out the report from the drawer, and Henry told me that I only had 2 months left. In just those short 2 months, Ben couldn't wait any longer and was already eagerly bringing Fiona into his home. Although Ben and I didn't have a wedding, I have already moved in as the bride of the Harris family. His mother said that I would have to move in sooner or later, and that it's not too late now. At this point, she might be regretting that. I don't know how much time had passed when Ben returned. He looked guilty and wanted to explain that what happened with Fiona was an accident, hoping I wouldn't overthink it. How could it happen that we ended up in bed having a child? Moreover, this woman had once hurt him so deeply, yet he still cannot forget her. I can't control the resentment bubbling inside me. Despite still being unwell, I emotionally lash out at his indifference. Seeing me lose control, Ben can only leave silently. He's probably gone to find Fiona again. Watching his retreating figure, I suddenly realized that we may never return to how things were before. A sudden sharp pain pierced my chest, causing me to curl up into a ball. I held myself tightly, gradually losing consciousness amid an infinite despair. In my hazy state, I seemed to catch a glimpse of the old Ben again, his warm smile full of hope as he said to me, "Lily, don't be afraid. I'm here for you." But now, all that accompanies me is the endless darkness. Deep within, I still long for an explanation from Ben. Perhaps he was truly just confused for a moment, or he was manipulated by Fiona. As long as he was willing to explain, I could forgive him and face it together, just like we had gone through things in the past. But his next words shattered my last shred of hope completely. "Fiona is pregnant with my child, and I plan to have her carry it to term. Lily, don't worry, this won't affect our child, my mom will take care of it." Ben spoke so casually, without a hint of guilt, and he didn't consider my feelings at all. He planned to just brush it off. What gave him the right to think I could accept all of this? I was completely stunned, and in my daze, I could hardly recognize the man I had loved for so many years. A severe headache and nausea hit me again, and I didn't even have the strength to argue with him. Dragging my weak body, I stumbled into the bathroom and started vomiting uncontrollably. When I looked up, I saw that the toilet was filled with blood. Ben didn't even spare me a glance. Perhaps to him, I was just pretending to gain sympathy. You also know that my mother has always wanted a grandson, and since you can't have children, it puts me in a difficult position. Lily, I haven't made you suffer over the years. I've worked hard to earn a living for our family. Can't you understand me and bear with it a little longer? Besides, she is my biological mother, I can't just watch her get hurt. Every word Ben says feels like a knife cutting into me. Reflecting on this, I can no longer hold it in. I slump to the ground and cough violently. Taking a deep breath, I look directly into Ben's eyes and say firmly, since you've decided to keep this child, why should I have to endure all of this? As soon as the words left my mouth, Ben's expression darkened ominously. He irritably lit a cigarette and coolly asked Lily, what are you up to? Noticing the impatience in his tone, I gathered my courage and explained word by word, I'm taking Wendy and cutting all ties from now on. We won't see each other again. This way, I can walk away unscathed. For Wendy, it's better for her parents to be apart than to face her mother's death. I don't want her to go through this kind of pain. Ben was very angry and refused me without hesitation. Lily, I'll say it again, stay out of the child's matters. This won't affect us, so don't make a fuss about it. With that, he slammed the door shut, rejecting my request. To help me calm down, he moved directly to his mother's house. I knew that Fiona was also there, taking care of herself, and Mrs. Lynn was looking after her attentively. At that moment, their family was harmonious and happy, while I was left alone with my ailments. I was the only one left who cared for Wendy. Wendy's 3rd birthday was approaching, and looking at the photo on the bedside table, I suddenly sent Ben a message, hoping he could find the time to come back and celebrate Wendy's birthday with her. This might be the last time I celebrate Wendy's birthday, and I want to do my best to fulfill her wishes. However, Ben has not responded at all. By the time the party ended, and Wendy folded her hands to make a wish, he still hadn't shown up. Wendy blinked her big eyes and asked me where Dad went. I was momentarily speechless and could only force a smile to change the subject. What wish did Wendy make? I hope Mom will take me to the zoo to play. The child's tender voice deeply touched me, and I nearly couldn't hold back my tears. This was Wendy's birthday wish from last year, but it was delayed due to school and my own matters. I was surprised that Wendy still remembered it. I promised her that Mom would definitely take her there. I gently stroked Wendy's small head and held her tightly in my arms. Her tiny body seemed quite frail, having gained very little weight over the past 3 years. The thought of this child growing up all alone in the future made my heart ache. How much longer can I stay by her side? With this thought, I buried my head in Wendy's tender shoulder, unable to hold back my tears. After lulling Wendy to sleep, I received a reply from Ben. Fiona suddenly felt unwell, and I've been at the hospital all day. I'm really tied up, let's talk about it another day. I stared blankly at my phone screen, lost in thought. After a long time, I finally mustered the courage to send him a message, asking if he could take a day off this weekend to take Wendy to the zoo and fulfill her wish. I tossed and turned in bed, anxiously waiting for his reply. Ultimately, Ben's response shocked me. Lily, didn't you want to break up with me? Why are you trying to change my mind with the child? If you want to win me back, you'll have to accept Fiona's child. As long as you admit your mistake, I will treat you the same way as before. I could hardly believe that Ben would actually say something like that. But who else could it be? The anger and resentment that had been suppressed for so long suddenly erupted. A violent bout of coughing left me unable to focus on the pain, as blood continued to pour out, filling my mouth with a metallic sweetness. I knew my time was running short. Recently, my health had deteriorated significantly, coughing up blood had become a common occurrence, and I frequently experienced stomach pain, making trips to the clinic a regular part of my life. To avoid worrying others, I always waited until they finished school to secretly visit the doctor. The health clinic is right at the entrance of the village, not far from the school. One day, Ben's mother suddenly came to the school to find him. Ben's father passed away early, and Mrs. Lin raised him on her own, cherishing her only son very much. Mrs. Lin is a typical person who looks down on the poor and favors the rich. She generally does not think very highly of my status, especially after learning that I might not be able to have children. Although we often show mutual courtesy for Ben's sake, the relationship is still somewhat delicate. I guess she came this time for Fiona. Once I entered the office, Mrs. Lin asked me to make her some tea. After a bit of small talk, she directly requested that I leave to make space for Fiona. I smiled wryly and told her that as long as Ben agreed, I could leave tonight. Mrs. Lin might not be fully aware of the actual situation, thinking that I was being difficult. It seems that her relationship with her son is not as close as I thought. I will remember this and hope that you can keep your word, and not come around later bothering my dear son. Mrs. Lin gave a cold smile. However, after returning home, Mrs. Lin, influenced by Fiona's words, still continued to bother me. Ben has always been very devoted to his mother, and as long as Mrs. Lin isn't involved, our life may be simple, but it is also very happy. However, once Mrs. Lin intervenes, it inevitably leads to arguments and a cold war. Now I understand that Mrs. Lin is considered absolute truth in Ben's eyes. Even when she is sometimes wrong, he would never oppose her. Ben often uses this line to rebut me, "Lily, why can't you understand my mom? It wasn't easy for her to raise me." Over the years, he has indeed often silenced me with such statements. At that moment, I had just taken a handful of painkillers and felt drowsy, curled up on the sofa. Perhaps my complexion really wasn't good, but to Ben, I seemed to be pretending to look pathetic. He suddenly yanked me up from the sofa, and I fell heavily to the floor, hitting the back of my head hard against the ground, making me see stars from the pain. A violent cough left me feeling weak, and I quickly covered my mouth, not wanting him to see that I was coughing up blood. To my surprise, I noticed that my palm was stained with red blood as well. Fortunately, Ben didn't notice and was still blaming me. I didn't want him to know about my illness to prevent him from misunderstanding that I was deliberately provoking him. At this moment, all I wanted was to end this relationship as soon as possible, so that in the future, his name wouldn't end up on my gravestone. I no longer wanted any connection with Ben. "Lily, don't forget that my mom is getting older and her health isn't good, you can't be so selfish. Moreover, it's not wrong for her to want a grandson. Just because you don't have the ability to give her one, does that mean you should deny others the opportunity?" Ben shouted at me, leaving me completely speechless. As for what Mrs. Lin complained about this time, I'm not sure, but I know it has a lot to do with Fiona. I was already used to her outbursts and was too indifferent to try to guess. Seeing that I wasn't responding, Ben seemed even angrier. If it weren't for Wendy running over to grab him, he might have lashed out at me. Before leaving, Ben sneered at Lily, saying, "Didn't you want to completely break up with me? Fine, I'll grant you that. But don't forget, all these years you've been eating my food and living in my place. I've spent so much money on you, what gives you the right to negotiate terms with me?" His words struck me like a heavy blow, making me feel dizzy and almost faint. I never expected Ben to be so heartless. All these years of our relationship are actually worth less than a few tens of thousands of dollars. Ben, you've made me realize that when we were together, who was it that supported your life? We should settle that account too. My health is deteriorating day by day, I can't just think about myself, but also need to consider Wendy's future. She absolutely cannot live with the Harris family. After all, once I'm gone, there will really be no one to take care of her. I endured the pain as the ache in my chest intensified. I can leave, but Wendy has to come with me. Upon hearing this, Mrs. Lin clapped her hands in approval, saying it was great and urged that the child be taken away to avoid being a nuisance at home. However, Ben hesitated. He glanced at me as if he wanted to say something, but was interrupted by Sue. Ben, what's there to hesitate about? Let them leave early. Fiona is carrying your child. Can you bear to let her wander outside? After my mother's repeated persuasion, Ben finally agreed to let me take Wendy away. That day, Fiona suddenly showed up with a man. I endured the sharp pain, trying to stay calm, to see what she really intended to do. I let my guard down and invited them into the house. To my surprise, as soon as the man stepped inside, he locked the door and covered my mouth and nose. I felt dizzy and weak all over, completely unable to resist. In my hazy state, I heard Fiona coldly say, Lily, you chose this path for yourself. If you were willing to let go, you wouldn't be in this situation now. Then she urged the man to hurry up and leave quickly once the deed was done. I'm not able to recall the details of what happened next. I only vaguely remember being stripped of all my clothes and left at their mercy. After taking the photos, they left me there, lying on the ground, feeling utterly hopeless. I felt as if I had lost all my vitality. Blood trickled from my lips. The intense pain was nearly unbearable. I felt like I was on the verge of losing it. Lying on the cold floor, I had no idea how much time had passed before I managed to catch my breath and shakily dialed Dr. Henry's number. With no family around, Dr. Zhao was the only person who cared for me. When the call connected, I weakly said, Dr. Zhao, I might not hold on much longer. Could you please come and get me? I have a few things I need to discuss. After that, I lost consciousness. When I woke up again, I was already lying on a hospital bed in the clinic. Beside the bed was Dr. Zhao, whose eyes were red, clearly having just cried. Dr. Zhao is my attending physician and has been taking good care of me all along. I regard him as family. I want to ask you to help me take care of Wendy. I weakly said, feeling as if my voice came from the depths of my being. Lily, you'll be all right. Dr. Zhao tried to remain calm and comfort me, but his eyes were filled with sorrow. I knew my time was short. I didn't need your comfort. I tremblingly grasped his hand and urgently said, please help take care of Wendy after I'm gone. Although she is not my biological child, I regard her as my own. I have put a card with about 50,000 yuan in Wendy's bag as her living expenses. If you don't want to take care of her later, please wait until she turns 18 to make a decision. As I was speaking, I couldn't help but shed tears. Don't say that anymore, I promise you, I will take care of Wendy. Henry, with red eyes, choked back tears and interrupted me. I understood in my heart that I might not be able to hold on much longer. At that moment, I suddenly thought of Ben and asked Dr. Zhao to bring me my phone. When I opened WeChat, a flood of unread messages appeared. Aside from system notifications, all the messages were from Ben. He didn't ask me where I had gone. Instead, he said that if I didn't come back soon, I shouldn't bother coming back at all. Recently, he also claimed that I was cheating during our marriage and flirting with other men, saying I was not worthy of him or our family. At that moment, I realized he might have received those photos taken by someone at Fiona's instigation. But instead of inquiring about the situation, he directly accused me and even called me a shameless person. How low can you be? You dare to act but refuse to face the consequences, and now you still have the nerve to come to me. You don't deserve to be my partner. Leave quickly and stop affecting my life. As I looked at the words on the screen, I couldn't help but cry. All the feelings I've had for him over the years ended up in such humiliation. I lay powerless on the hospital bed, devoid of any motivation to go on living. With great difficulty, I managed to finish reading the message Ben sent, and a wave of pain washed over me. He then sent me a series of photos and videos. In the photos, Ben and his mother are burning my belongings, clothes, photos, diaries, everything reduced to ashes. The items that couldn't be burned were dumped in a garbage pile at the edge of the village. Nearby, Wendy was crying deeply, and her sobs pierced my heart. In the video, Mrs. Lin smugly remarked that Lily was like a jinx in their house, it didn't matter whether she was there or not. Thankfully, Ben listened to my advice, or else their family would inevitably suffer because of her. Wendy was crying out for her mother nearby, but no one paid attention to her. Seeing this made my head buzz, and tears streamed down my face. A surge of anger overwhelmed me, and I began to cough uncontrollably while starting to spit up fresh blood. Dr. Zhao quickly handed me a sputum bowl, which soon filled with bright red frothy blood. My breathing became increasingly difficult, and my consciousness began to fade. The figure of Ben appeared, wearing the clothes from our student days, smiling at me in the golden wheat fields. Lily said that when the wheat is ripe, life will get better. However, everything is different now. In the final moments of my life, I seemed to hear Dr. Zhao calling my name, but I could no longer respond. I am finally free, no longer enduring the pain and mental torment. I feel free now. Just like that, I left this world while in the hospital, with only Henry knowing about my passing. Henry looked at me, and after a long pause, he slowly spoke, "Lily, do you know I've always liked you? I liked you for a long time, but back then, you only had feelings for Ben and didn't see me at all. Lily, don't worry, I will take good care of Wendy." His hand trembled slightly as our hands held tightly together. Henry whispered that he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Then, he dialed Ben's number, but after several tries, no one answered. So, Henry had to use his own phone to make the call. Finally, the call connected, and Henry instinctively clenched his hand. On the other end of the line, Fiona's laughter echoed. After Ben told her to be quiet, Henry finally asked, "Are you Lily's family?" They had come to the hospital to handle some procedures, but Lily had passed away. Henry paused for a moment, his voice filled with emotion. Without waiting for a response, he hung up the phone. "Lily, if I had told you earlier, would it have been?" Henry still didn't finish his sentence. I watched him walk out of the ward. A nurse came in and took me to the morgue. Ben arrived with red eyes, he trembled as he lifted the covering from my face, tears slipping down the corners of his eyes and falling onto my face. He cried out, "Lily, stop pretending. I know you're not dead. Don't think that this will make me stay by your side." I felt regret in my heart. Wendy still hoped to be with me. She has a younger brother, doesn't she? Fiona's child is about to be born, and Wendy is going to be a big sister. As soon as Henry walked in, he threw a punch at Ben and angrily said, "Wendy's custody is in my hands, and I wouldn't mind going to court over it." After that, he hit Ben with 2 more punches. That night, Ben went home with a swollen face. "Henry, why did you do that?" I wanted to stop him, but as I gently approached, I couldn't reach anyone. I could only hear Henry whispering something in my ear. I leaned in closer, but I couldn't make it out. My lips mimicked his, opening and closing, as if he were saying "I love you." Not long after, Ben brought my ashes back. Fiona looked very displeased and urged Ben to take them away quickly. "Once you're dead, you're dead. Why bring it up again?" she said. "Fiona, you shouldn't forget that Ben rarely speaks up for me." Unfortunately, it was already too late. A few days later, I was still at the Harris family. Perhaps it was because the mourning period hadn't ended yet. Ben accompanied Fiona for her prenatal checkup, but some issues arose. The child in Fiona's womb was not Ben's. Ben felt like he was raising someone else's child. This truly is the cycle of cause and effect. Ben angrily slapped Fiona and shouted, "You despicable person. You're carrying someone else's child. This is not mine at all." Fiona fell to the ground after being struck, covering her face and crying. "Ben, what are you talking about? Are you brave enough to do it but not to admit it?" Fiona cried out, "This child is your ex-husband's, isn't it? You want me to take care of his child. Ben angrily shouted, "How could you do this?" After saying that, she kicked Fiona hard in the lower back. Fiona immediately clutched her stomach in pain, and the floor beneath her gradually became soaked with bright red liquid. Ben felt a bit panicked. He wanted to reach out to her but hesitated and withdrew his hand, nervously biting his nails. Fiona's face was pale, and she kept crying out, "Help! Someone, please help me." Just then, Mrs. Lin returned from grocery shopping. As soon as she opened the door and saw the blood on the floor, she screamed, "Fiona, what happened?" She hurriedly told Ben, "Quick, call for a doctor. My precious grandson can't be in trouble." Mrs. Lin tightly grasped Ben's arm, shaking him in a state of panic. Fiona immediately quieted down and fainted. Mrs. Lin hurried over, and with one sentence from Ben, her cries stopped. "Mom, the child in her belly isn't mine." Mrs. Lin paused for a moment, puzzled, and asked, "Son, what do you mean?" "I said, the child in her belly is not mine. Do you understand? Your son is letting someone else take care of the child." Ben seemed to have found a way to vent his anger as he slammed the door and stormed out. Mrs. Lin was taken aback, collapsing to the ground, her expression blank and dazed. "How pitiful." Mrs. Lin angrily glanced at Fiona on the floor, then called her home. "I noticed the report on the table, signed by a doctor named Henry. These days, Ben has been out drinking, not coming home all day. He keeps calling my name, but what good does it do? The person is already gone." Half a month later, Ben lost his mind, desperately searching for a woman named Lily. Mrs. Lin couldn't stop him, and could only continuously complain that Fiona had harmed her son while secretly reminiscing about the good times I had with him. They felt regret, but I was no longer able to go back to the past.